Greetings, this is Michael Erlewine, and I'm going to talk about the Dharma, but I'm going to talk about what happens in the Bardo. That's what happens after we die. It's going to take a little presentation here. I'll do my best. And what I'd been writing about the last few days before I do this, I find pretty much unknown. What I'm going to talk about is pretty much unknown. There's been perhaps a little bit of feedback here that I recognize as an awareness of this condition, but not much. This tells me that our attachment to samsara, and samsara is the cyclic world of ups and downs we live in, that attachment's strong, and it's very deep-seated, and it's most carefully hidden from our awareness. We're just not aware of it. And this is what I personally experienced as part of having a major stroke. Totally unexpected, but what happened was unforgettable. That stroke gave me an alternate view that was crystal clear, and that view was clearer than any view that I'd ever had. And this is what I'm trying to have you understand. My mind, immediately after the stroke, and for hours and days after the stroke, was crystal clear, not foggy or confused. What was foggy, so to speak, was where my precious cover, all my attachments, all my, what I call myself, all the entertainments I totally subscribed to, they were gone, and they were gone beyond going, at least for quite a while, weeks and months. These distractions, these entertainments, were just no longer there. They weren't available to me, and I felt excruciatingly naked and uncomfortable without them. And you can bet that I tried to find them, tried to find some place to hide from the clarity, because it was just too brilliant. Too much to stand. I felt absolutely naked and exposed, and I'd never felt that before. It was the absence of those usual entertainments and clinginess, the absence of those that allowed my mind to be so clear. They were gone. Had I been able to slip back into the sheath of my very comfortable distractions, the lifelong tendency to entertain myself and be busy just all the day, all the time, that's all I'd ever known. The light would have gone back out of the clarity had that cover returned. So this deep-seated attachment and comfort of my samsaric haunts had clouded any ability that I might have to see clearly. And then suddenly, with the stroke, I could see it. And it was overwhelmingly clear. I'd always thought that something like a stroke would cloud the mind, confuse it, not clarify it. And yes, I didn't have access to my personal memories, or they were very, very dim. I couldn't reach them. And I didn't have access, especially my habit of being constantly busy, such a busy bee, and entertained by life. And I saw to that. And that, although terrifying, the clarity was a blessing in disguise, because I could finally see clearly what I had never seen before, just how the mind worked, and just what samsara was and what samsara did to us. And from this, I believe the best we can hope for without inviting what I had to go through, like having a stroke, is to gently begin to loosen the ties that habitually bind us to samsara, and settle, begin to relax ourselves down. thus learning to come gently to rest like a feather in this present moment, and become increasingly familiar with the nature of how the mind works in its clarity. Of course, there's no end to the total revolution involved in turning our known world inside out and upside down. Our samsaric world revolves around our attachments and karma and what becomes of it. It's much like the earth turns 360 degrees each day. So much revolves around ourself as if it were the sun, which it's not. And then for me, that sun, that self, that conscious mind was suddenly shattered and just gone. And what was left? That's the amazing thing. After all, samsara amounts to the sum total of what obscures us from recognizing the true nature of the mind. And we apparently have been busy, totally busy, accumulating even more obscurations that themselves are separative, and they further separate us from clarity. We have to reverse that process. Reversing the process of accumulating karma, which we know nothing about, involves the deconstructions of what we call our reified self. All the exaggerations that we imagine, and whittling that self down to size, thus bringing more transparency into our lives. Transparency that's like a window that we can see through to what's beyond, and what's beyond is the actual nature and clarity of how the mind works and is. However, just talking about like this, or just thinking on something, conceptualization is not what's meant here. Much less does that give us the feeling and experience we need to remove the blinders from our spiritual eyes, so to speak. So the whole idea here is to get a handle on the mind itself, meaning to become familiar enough with the mind and how it works, to actually work it ourselves, for us to work the mind, to use the mind independently and on our own. And the instructions to do so are like taking the hands of a young person and placing them on the steering wheel of life, and thus help us to begin steering our own life, actually using the mind instead of just putting up with it, being swept along by the winds of life. I can see that we like to think we're in control, and we like to think we know our own mind because that's all we know. But unfortunately, doesn't seem to be the case. Intellectually, and from a conceptual point of view, we may understand something conceptually, yet experiencing it firsthand has not yet taken place, meaning we don't yet know what we intellectually are talking about it. We can only talk about it. We are just talking about it, and we mistake conceptual understanding for actual experience, which is not. Much less is it the full realization of that experience. And there are just so many ways to miss the point in Dharma training, which is why so much is made of a student's recognizing the actual nature of the mind, as with Zen Buddhism, it's called Kensho. And with Tibetan Buddhism, it's called recognition of the true nature of the mind. Both meaning are being introduced to the mind until it becomes actually familiar to us. That's the point of Dharma training. Familiarization with our own mind and our taking control instead of just being subject. It's true that my Dharma teacher was a guide to me all of his life, for some 36 years until he passed on, and his teachings continue to inform me. However, the main point of my working with him all those years was so that he could introduce me to the nature of the mind until I recognized it to his satisfaction, and he said so. At that point of recognition, when I got it, so to speak, Rinpoche's task, job, or purpose was essentially complete. When I became familiar enough with the actual nature of the mind and could begin to teach myself by actually just working with the mind, Rinpoche did not have to help keep my hands on the steering wheel of life. I could do that myself. I could now do that.